when people are yanked out of their car, particularly black people are yanked out of their car.
The petite jury or the petit jury concludes.
Paul, it is that language that you should be using, because that's what the law says. You should literally be saying you're challenging whether or not this is a fair cross section.
And,
I know that.
My frustration is that the test that the Supreme Court has provided is unwinnable.
About this jury and how values can change depending on the community that you are in. So,
over and over again. And then the last
involved, there were 3 officers that were acquitted last week.
Members of the jury, welcome to our 3rd episode of Jury Duty Unmasked. My name is Will Snowden. I am the director of the Juror Project, and I am with
your best wing girl, Porsha-Shaf'on Venable. I am the deputy director of the Juror Project. Good evening, everyone.
Yes, indeed. We're really excited to be here with you all. We love talking about juries. We love talking about the power that exists within the jury box. And even more importantly, we're here to share information with you about why you should be excited to serve on juries, looking at the jury box as a way to flex power that the community has and really crystallize and understand the role that the community plays in ensuring that we have a criminal legal system that is worthy of its name. The Juror Project was founded with the principle of understanding that we need more diverse juries. Not just diversity of race, but also diversity of perspective, diversity of experience, diversity in every sense of the word. And the reason why we advocate for more diversity on our juries is for a few reasons. One reason is historically in our country, there's been an effort to prevent Black and brown people and other people of color from accessing the power of the jury box. Additionally, we know that when our juries are in fact more diverse, people get more fair trials. And I know without a doubt, everybody wants to ensure as best we can that we have a fair criminal legal system. This series is something that's very important to us. And I'm going to ask Porsha-Shaf'on to give a little background about why we do these series.
So we always think that, an informed jury is a powerful jury, right? And each one of you in our juror communities is a prospective juror. And we want to make sure that we are not gatekeepers of this information, right? We want to make sure that you understand, one, people power, but also process, right? The process of the criminal legal system can be incredibly jarring and daunting to those that are not in the know. Will and I and other attorneys that are on this call, that's a part of our daily experience. And so the mystique of the criminal legal system is not really there for us, right? And so we want to make sure that we share this information with each and every one of you.
Absolutely. And we're really excited to do so. This evening, we're going to be talking about something that's important, something that we have to take head on as the Juror Project. And that is why, reasons and ideas and just some myths of why people actually do not want to serve on a jury. And I'll admit, some of these are very valid, right? Some people don't want to serve because they literally cannot afford to take time off of work and go perform their civic duty. Sometimes people don't want to serve because they just do not like the criminal legal system and they don't want to be involved in a system that they do not believe is just and fair. And sometimes people just don't want to serve because they have never been taught to think otherwise. Well, this evening, Porsha-Shaf'on and I are going to talk a little bit about some excuses that we are familiar with, but also give some framing against the logic in terms of why the Juror Project wants everybody to serve. So before we dive into that, I'm going to invite you all to participate in an exercise that Porsha-Shaf'on and I do when we are having conversations with the community. If you're on your you already know, this is one of my favorite things to do. And, it works virtually. It's best in person because you can see everybody's reactions. But if you have a cell phone, I'm going to ask you to take it out. And I want you to go to a Google search. So you have the Google search bar in front of you. And I want to give you 5 words to type in. The first word is how. The second word is to, T-O. The third word is get. The fourth word is out. And 90% of the time, I do not need to give you the fifth word. But if you need the fifth word is of. And when we do this exercise, 9 times out of 10, the very first thing that Google will suggest, it will automatically fill in the sentence to complete the search query to read how to get out of jury duty. And when we do this, it doesn't matter if you're in California, in New York, in Texas, Louisiana, Wisconsin, we've done this around the country. And it doesn't matter the jurisdiction, that answer is almost always populated to complete that sentence to suggest that there are a ton of people in our country who are researching how to get out of jury service. And then what we also notice is that query, that search query, ranks higher than people searching how to get out of debt or how to get out of depression. Now, Porsha-Shaf'on and I will be the first to tell you that jury service is not that bad. And actually, when we have conversations with people who have served on a jury, it turns out they actually really enjoyed it. And that the myth behind this idea of getting out of jury service is really something that we want to flip on its head as an organization. But we've also heard members of the community say, jury service is actually something that I really enjoyed participating in, which is not the current rep that it has. So, Porsha-Shaf'on, you have been to trial numerous times. You have selected countless juries. You've spoken to many members of the community during that conversation process, which is called voir dire. What are some of the excuses that you've either heard in court or you've heard people talk about in the community in terms of why they try to get out of jury service?
Well, I'll begin with the legitimate excuses, right? That serving on a jury can be a financial hardship. Absolutely. Absolutely. You should be able to provide for your family, right? Provide for yourself. And serving on a jury should not curtail that, right? And so if serving on a jury is going to be a financial hardship for you, then that by all means, right? That makes total sense. Other excuses that I've heard is that, well, other reasons why people serve in the military, right? They're in active duty. People are students, right? And serving on a jury will impact their ability to study and attend classes. People have medical needs, whether it be multiple medical appointments, whether it be medical appointments for themselves or for loved ones, where they have medical needs that don't allow them to sit down for hours at a time, right? That they have felony convictions and they unfortunately are in one of the states that don't allow individuals to serve on juries with felony convictions. Shout out to the Jury of Our Peers coalition in New York, one of many states that's trying to change that. There are people who talk about having experiences with actors in the criminal legal system, whether it be police or prosecutors or defense attorneys, that have created biases within them. And so they state that they can't be fair and impartial to both sides. So yeah, those are some of the reasons of familial hardships, right? If they have childcare issues, if they have loved ones that need around-the-clock care. These are all some of the reasons that people have given. Scheduling issues. They have flights and plans that they don't want to miss to serve on jury duty.
Absolutely. And I want to add a little bit to this reality that some people just can't afford to serve on juries. I know in Louisiana, at least particularly in Orleans Parish, you get paid $10 a day for actually serving on the jury. So that doesn't include time waiting in the jury lounge or even participating in jury selection. You only get paid if you're actually selected to participate in the trial, listen to the evidence, listen to the facts, and participate in the deliberation process. You're only getting $10 a day if you actually serve. So that can pose a problem for folks. Porsha-Shaf'on, do you recall what New Yorkers are paid when they serve on juries?
So currently, New Yorkers are paid $40, I believe between $40 and $45. But there's actually a bill right now that's proposing, I believe, $72 in New York. And again, that too is only if you actually get selected and you hear evidence on a jury.
Yeah. Now, there are some really good protections in terms of employers cannot fire you for taking time off work to go serve on a jury, but they don't have to pay you. So
That's
in the reality of people needing to provide for their family, they need to be able to make rent, they need to pay a car note, whatever it might be, this financial burden is real. And when people say, listen, I have to work 2 jobs, or I can't afford a babysitter, I don't have somebody to help me with my child care, that's a legitimate reason. That is a legitimate excuse. And
absolutely.
it's really the responsibility of the system to respond to that. And one example of responding to this financial hardship is what we've seen out of California, this pilot program called Be the Jury. And what this program has been able to do is partner with some philanthropic support to pay people who are either considered low socioeconomic status or perhaps kind of moderate socioeconomic status in the medium range. They're getting paid $100 a day to serve. And the preliminary report has shown that by providing this money and this support, the representativeness and the diversity of those juries has increased drastically. So it is a unique thing to consider in terms of the role that money can play. And there's some legitimacy in terms of people offering that as an excuse.
Absolutely. And shout out to Brendan Woods for being a huge part of that increase in juror pay.
Absolutely. Too often, people who want to serve simply can't. And another excuse that I have heard is as it relates to people's religion, right? And there's this idea of people saying, you know, I can't sit in judgment of another individual. My religion prevents me from doing so. And I'm not able in that moment to have a conversation with that potential juror about all the potential religious reasons why the person should participate in the jury. But what ends up happening is sometimes people will come into jury service with this notion that they should try to do anything they can to get out of jury service.
Absolutely.
Porsha-Shaf'on, do you have any idea where this myth might come from or where this idea might come from?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so there are a lot of reasons, right, that people don't actually want to engage separate and apart from financial hardships, like the excuses that we've already talked about, right? And, you know, the idea of getting it wrong, right? Like people have legitimate fears of getting it wrong, of convicting a person who's innocent, right? Imagine, you know, you being a part of someone's being caged for decades, even for months, for a crime that they didn't commit, right? The weight of that guilt is pretty heavy, right? And people are rightfully concerned about that. And that is fair, right? It's fair to sort of want to get it right. Obviously, as a lawyer, as a Black woman, as a person, I want to do my best as well in all things. And, you know, jury service is an opportunity to actually change someone's life. You literally have the opportunity to give someone the chance that you potentially wish you would have gotten, you know, at some point in your life. This is an opportunity to give someone grace that you wish you would have gotten at some point in your life.
That's right. I think about some of the harms that we have been exposed to that have been committed in the name of our criminal legal system. And particularly, I remember I had the privilege of representing somebody who was charged with possession with intent to distribute some type of drugs. But in reality, he was a drug user, not a drug seller. I'm sure many of our people listening have a Costco membership. Or what's the other one? Not Walmart, Sam's Club membership.
Sam's Club, DJs, yep.
So like the idea of buying things in bulk is not necessarily indicative of their intent to sell, right? And I remember as I was doing a jury selection for this trial, a person showed up who was a firefighter, and they had their firefighter polo on. And sometimes people will try to do that as a visual representation of saying, like, I can't be here because I have an important job. But when I was talking to this firefighter, he said, you know, I can't serve on this jury because I see my son at that table. My son has a substance use issue. And they treated him the exact same way, where they were trying to say that he was a drug dealer when we knew he had a drug problem. And I lift that up because people are not always in agreement with how our criminal legal system tries to secure this concept of justice. And really, when the firefighter told me that, I asked him if he thought a person with his background, the firefighter's background, and familiarity with people with substance use issues, if that type of a person would have served on his son's jury if he thought that his son might have a different outcome of the case. And he said, well, absolutely, because of the perspective that I have and understanding that I have. And so I was trying to basically have him pay it forward and saying, well, I know this isn't your son at the table, but it's a person who may have been in a similar situation as your son, and trying to get him to actually commit to serving. I was unsuccessful in doing so, and he ultimately was struck from the jury. But just thinking about how people have witnessed some of the harms that are carried out in the name of our criminal legal system, they don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah, I think that sometimes, we are socialized to be individualistic, right? So even though it's not your son, it's somebody's son. Even though that's not your daughter, it's somebody's daughter, right? It's somebody's uncle's, mother's, cousin, sister's brother, right? And I think that, as we witness on a daily basis, the harms that are committed that are visited on other people, right? It's important for us to remember that at any moment it could be us, right? We are just one community away from it being us. We're just one law enforcement officer too many from it being us or someone that we love. So I want to urge folks to really think about that when you typing in those excuses, or you're typing how to get out of in your juror box, in your Google chats or your Google boxes. That's right.
Porsha, your sound was a little funky on my end. I don't know if it could just be my old computer. I don't know. I was still able to hear what you were saying.
Is it okay now?
It just, I don't know. It sounds interesting for some reason. I don't know how to explain it. It's almost like a warble or something. Who knows? Maybe it's just on my end. In any event, we do this work with the assumption that people understand why it's important to serve on juries, and having this conversation as it relates to why there's so much power in the jury box. We want folks to really understand that jury service is something that you should be getting, excited about, and not running to Google, as we said, to try to figure out ways to get out of jury service. Now, we think through these reasons, right? So people not being able to afford to take time off of work, people not wanting to be involved in the criminal legal system and the harms that it can sometimes perpetuate. And then there's this idea of it just takes a lot of time. Right?
You read my mind. I was literally thinking about, the unpredictability of trials. You've read my mind. That's crazy and creepy.
Well, tell me a little bit about that unpredictability. Why is it so difficult? We set a trial date, folks call ready, go to trial. Like, why is it so unpredictable sometimes?
So any lawyer on this call will know that, even the most prepared lawyers will run into something happening that was unexpected during a trial. A witness gets sick, client gets sick, a juror gets sick. Cross-examination or direct examination, right? The questioning of the witnesses can take longer than expected. Some legal argument, could potentially come up that would delay, the calling of a witness. And so while we thought that we were going to have 4 witnesses on Monday, we only actually got to 2, right? And so then that bleeds into the next day. And again, right, sometimes there's evidence that needs to be litigated about whether or not it's going to come in between the parties.
Mm-hmm.
And a witness can't potentially be called until that legal issue is settled, right? There are a million of reasons why trials can potentially take longer than expected. But more often than not, it's scheduling, it's illness, and it is legal arguments between the parties.
That's right. And I think about ways in which we're not just talking about the defense. We're not just talking about the prosecution. Sometimes witnesses are flown from out of state. Sometimes
Correct.
experts are brought through. Sometimes eyewitnesses don't live in the jurisdiction. And so we got to get everything to align just right so that trial can actually proceed. And unfortunately, that takes time. One of the differences between the federal system and the state system is in the federal system, you get to kind of call in the morning and say, hey, you know, I have jury duty this week. I'm calling to check in to see if I'm needed today.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the federal court will say, nope, we don't need you today, and you can go on to work. Whereas in the state system, at least in New Orleans, you have to go to the courthouse and you wait in the jury lounge, and you are essentially just hanging out to see if there is a section of court that is going to need a jury for that particular day. So I think there's an opportunity there to increase the efficiency, and so that we're valuing people's time and that we're not unnecessarily taking them away from work, and really just thinking through ways in which we can be respectful of folks' schedules, but also ensure that people who have this right to go to trial are being provided with a jury of their peers.
I agree. You know, last year I received the juror summons, and I went to the courthouse to engage in jury duty. New York is actually not one of the states where you can call in to see, right? And you know, and thinking about how that works, it is a convenient but also an incredibly respectful thing to do, right? For prospective jurors, for the opportunity to call in to see if I'm needed, as opposed to taking the time out of my day to ride all the way to the courthouse, to sit in a room and just wait, right? And not be given a lot of information. But I remember even when we were called to the courtroom, how, you know, the judge just kept us waiting, right? And, you know, when people hear these stories about, you know, the process and people's crappy experiences with juror service, that only serves to, you know, substantiate the views that are already held about how frustrating and inconvenient and annoying juror service is. And so, you know, our criminal legal system, you know, our juror commissioners, there's opportunity there to be more respectful of people's time.
That's right. Somehow, some way, the Juror Project on our website, we have a link to a survey. And typically we will share this link with participants after we've given a presentation, so we can get feedback on how the presentation landed, things that folks learned, and perhaps ways in which we can improve. Somehow, some way, that link was shared in a jury lounge. And people were using the link to give the Juror Project feedback about their juror experience. And so when I was getting these surveys, I was like, we didn't give a presentation today. Like, what is going on? And the top thing that people were complaining about was like, this was a waste of my time. I got here at 9 o'clock in the morning. I was dismissed at 2 p.m. and I didn't do anything. And look, we get it. Nobody wants to sit in a jury lounge with cold coffee and crappy Wi-Fi. Like, people have things that they're trying to do. And so really, you know, acknowledging that, hey, there is a user experience that courts can be mindful of to improve the process, so that people are a little bit more excited about serving because they know that their time is going to be used very efficiently.
Absolutely. You know, there's absolutely opportunity there. And I don't know if people will be excited, but at the very least, people will see it as less of an inconvenience, and they will come in open, right, to the opportunity to serve. I don't think that we, you know, as actors in a criminal legal system, can talk out of both sides of our mouth, right? We can't say, or we can't talk about the importance of juror service, then at the same time make the experience terrible, right? It's like restaurants who advertise like this amazing food, but then give you crappy service. Like, we can't have it. Like, we can't talk out of both sides of our mouth.
That's right. You mentioned that you had the opportunity to serve on a jury. Can you just walk us through the process from like when you got the summons in the mailbox to when you showed up to court? What did that look like?
So I did not get picked, unfortunately, but It was interesting because I live in the Bronx and I work in the Bronx, right? So, I show up for my juror summons and I'm ready to serve. And one of the individuals recognized me and they're like, "Oh, Miss Venable, we got you. You don't even have to do it." I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. I'm here. I absolutely want to be here. Like, no stress. I'm here. I'm ready. Have your way with me." And so, for the first day, I literally sat in a juror room with everybody else. And, I watched people, sit on their phones, pick up their laptops and work and read books and eat very strange foods. I mean, because juror service, right, is a culmination of everyone from the community. So, everyone, it could be anybody that, comes into the juror room and we're just waiting. We're literally sitting around waiting for our names to be called. And then my name was picked with a batch of jurors to go up to a court part to be voir dire. We got upstairs to the courtroom and we waited for another hour before anyone actually
wow.
came and spoke with us. After that, they told us to come back the next day first we got sworn in, right? And that's essentially to make sure that we understand that we are a part of this prospective panel. And in the morning or the very next day, we had to come back to that particular court part. But what was wild is no one talked to us, right? No one talked to us. And the
Wow.
first communication that we got was to come back the next day after being sworn in, right? You're not given a car fare to come to and from court. You're not given lunch, right? And so that treatment of community members assumes a lot. And then we all came back the next day. We sat for the entire morning, and then we were told we were excused.
Mm, wow.
That was my experience.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. You use this term panel. What is a panel and why is that significant?
So basically, a panel is a group of jurors that are brought from the jury room, and at least that's what it's called in New York, right? So we're all waiting in a juror room. About 60 names are called. Mine was one of the 60 names. We were sent up to the courtroom. We were sworn in. And so that group of 60 is called the panel for that particular courtroom. And so, this particular panel, or rather from this particular panel of 60 people, at least 18 to 20 of us would be randomly selected to be sat into the juror box and be questioned first by the judge and then by the prosecution and defense. And then that process would keep going until a jury was selected in that particular case.
Got it. Thanks for that. And I just want to insert a constitutional reference, right?
Mhm.
The Constitution and case law that evolves from the Sixth Amendment says that the panel in which you are selecting your jurors from, you as a person who's going to trial, you have a right to select that jury from a fair cross-section of the community. So when we say fair cross-section, Porsha-Shaf'on, you were talking about you can get anybody from the community, right? That is going to be a representative sample of the jurisdiction that you're in. And so when people are making excuses to get out of jury service, either they're just not showing up because they don't have the right mindset, or they have some of those legitimate reasons for not being able to serve that we talked about earlier, it is actually kind of diminishing a person's constitutional right to be able to select your jury from that fair cross-section of the community. Even more, when you are part of that panel, and one of the first things you say is something wild that you looked up on Google and you're automatically kicked off, again, you are diminishing this right. And this concept of having a jury of your peers, which ultimately is supposed to come out of this fair cross-section that is supposed to be provided on the panel.
Absolutely. And remember, as I remember selecting a jury, and just like you and other, lawyers and advocates on this call, I remember Black person and brown person after Black person and brown person being excused from the juror, and my client's anxiety level rising was palpable, right? The fear that they were not going to have a jury of their peers or even a diverse jury was terrifying, right? Because you're essentially watching your opportunity to have your life changed, right? Or to have someone that may be able to bring a perspective that is consistent with your values and your community into that deliberation room. And it's a terrifying feeling for me and more importantly for my client.
That's right. I share this story a lot. But I think it does a good kind of representation of the work that we're trying to target. I was representing somebody who was charged with possessing 2 crack rocks and 3 pills that are typically you have to have a prescription for. And I'm, conducting jury selection. An older black man raises his hand and he says, Mr. Snowden, I don't think I can vote guilty for your guy because it sounds like he has a drug problem and needs help, not incarceration. And after he said that, there were about 4 to 5 other black and white people who essentially said the same thing, that they did not want to be using our criminal legal system to punish people with substance use issues. And after I sat down, the prosecutor stood up and struck all of those people from the jury. And in that moment, my client leaned over to me and said, "What happened to all of my people?" He wasn't just talking about the black folks on the jury because my client was a black man. He was also talking about the white people who understood that he had a drug problem and needed help, not incarceration. And so when we think about how our system does not always facilitate a jury of one's peers, this is part of the work that the Juror Project is focused on, because there are people in our community who do not believe in sending people to prison for simple possession of drugs. And if the Constitution says we have a right to a fair cross-section of the community to select our jury from, and we know that there's this concept of having a jury of our peers to sit in judgment of our case, why is it that some peers get access to the power of that jury box while others do not? And what's frustrating for me is this notion that sometimes our system facilitates people having access to the power of the jury box that might be viewed as being more pro-police or pro-prosecution, when there are other individuals who might be pro-individual or pro-defendant. They're not able to access the power of the jury box as easily.
Absolutely. Our criminal legal system historically has understood the power of the juror box, right? And the opportunity to change lives and the opportunity to do what's just. And the understanding of this power has been so clear that there have been deliberate attempts, right, to keep Black and brown people off jurors. So it wasn't, so even Black and brown people that have actually wanted to serve and have shown up, ready, willing, and able to engage this process were deliberately kept off this jury. That is why we have, People v. Batson now, Batson v. Kentucky now, right? Is because we want to ensure that lawyers are not using what is called their preemptory challenges in order to keep Black people off of jurors, keep brown people off of jurors, keep women off of jurors.
That's right. And we want to welcome any questions folks might have. Go ahead, include them in the comments, and we'll get to them. We do have one question that I'm going to get to in a second, but Porsha-Shaf'on, you bring something up as it relates to how Black people have been treated in this system of trying to serve on juries. And I have to share, and I know you're familiar with this case. It's out of New Jersey. It was a case called State versus Andujar or Andujar. I think it's Andujar. And the way that this Black man from Newark was treated was wild. So he shows up for jury service and the prosecutors are asking him questions and he's answering them. And they're like, "What do you think about the jury system?" He's like, "Or what do you think about our criminal legal system?" He's like, "It's good that we have an opportunity for people to be judged by a community of their peers." And then they ask them about, does he have anybody in his family who's been impacted by the criminal legal system? And he gives examples from both sides. He says, "Look, I got people in my family who are serving time. I also have people in my family who have been victims of crime." And the prosecutors ultimately tried to move to strike this person for legal cause, right? And as you mentioned, there's a peremptory strike, but there's also a cause strike. A unique difference between a peremptory strike And a cause strike is that there are an unlimited amount of cause strikes, and there are a limited amount of peremptory strikes. And you also mentioned this case, Batson versus Kentucky, and we've talked about that case before, which creates these protections that when there are suspicions that a attorney is discriminating against jurors, whether it's based on race or on gender, you can challenge the use of those peremptory strikes. Well, in this case, the prosecution moves to strike this black man from Newark from the jury, and the judge denies the motion. They then go on break. I think they go on lunch break. The prosecution then runs a background check on this man. They find out that he has a warrant, an active warrant for his arrest. They then inform the court that they are going to arrest this man, right? And they're going to, have the judge excuse him, and they're going to have law enforcement arrest him in the hallway. And that's exactly what happens. Now, the defense could not raise a Batson challenge because the prosecution never used a peremptory strike. And so what they ended up doing was using the reality that this person had an active warrant as the reason for cause to strike this person from the jury. He leaves the courtroom. He gets arrested in the hallway, and he went to that court to serve. He did not go to that court to be arrested. And then the crazy part is that after he's arrested, the case in which he was arrested on was thrown out, right? So just thinking about when people are serving, sometimes we have some prosecutors who will do anything they can to try to kick certain people off the jury. And if they can't use a cause strike, typically they will try to use a peremptory strike. But that's not what happened here.
Absolutely. I mean, Black people and brown people 360 or 180 rather experience indignities in the criminal legal system, whether you are accused of a crime, if you're an employee, right, and you get treated disrespectfully by court staff, if you're coming to serve on a jury, right? The amounts of indignities people experience walking inside that building also contribute to why they don't want to serve. I mean, I'm paid to be there, and I often experience anxiety walking into the Hall of Injustice, right? And so I totally understand why people don't want to be, engaging in a harmful system. Like that actually is a legitimate feeling. And I hear you and I feel you. But what matters more to me than the indignities that I experience is the opportunity. And I cannot trust this enough to change someone's life.
Absolutely right. And in that case from New Jersey, I bet you that man will never want to show up for jury service again because of how the system treated him. I do have to note that case actually sparked a very large conversation in New Jersey, which I know Porsha-Shaf'on, you were involved with in terms of helping to revamp what the jury system looks like in New Jersey. And just thinking through the ways in which there are other examples that we may not even know of how people who show up for jury service aren't treated the way that we want them to be treated. Send us your questions. One of the questions that we have, and I'll have you take a first crack at it, Porsha-Shaf'on, is what does someone who has these realistic barriers do if they really want to participate?
So one of the things, so if we're talking about financial hardships, right? Oftentimes because, if courtrooms and defense attorneys or rather state actors truly care about, having diverse juries, when someone is honest about these barriers, trying to think creatively about ways to accommodate, right? So, if the person is willing to work with you, right? And, serving 5 days a week could create a financial hardship. If it's not, if it doesn't harm or prejudice our clients in any way, can we accommodate this individual in some way? Can we, engage this trial 3 or 4 days instead of 5 so that they could work some of these days and, supplement the income that they're losing from serving? If someone has medical needs, right, and they're upfront about what their medical needs are, could we accommodate, their medical needs? If a person has to take breaks 2 or 3 times a day, are there ways that, we can accommodate these things? Now, for individuals that have biases in the criminal legal system, I ask you, to simply be open to conversing and really talking to your other community members, right? Because that's really what juror service is about. It's about individuals that have had different life experiences coming together and really trying to figure out the best way um, to deal with an accusation of potential harm or potential injustice by state actors, right? That's really what juror service is about. And, the outcome of juror service should be a reflection of community values and community mindset. So, for individuals that have these realistic medical and financial barriers, us as state actors really need to think more creatively about accommodating individuals with special needs.
Love it. Thank you for sharing that. As it relates to the barrier of finances, I really do hope we can see an increase in the amount of money we are paying jurors across the country. Excited to see if we can expand programs like the Be the Jury pilot project in California. I'm just recognizing that financial barriers are a real thing, and they should not play a role as it relates to facilitating who can serve on a jury and who cannot. I want to close out with something that we talk a lot about, and that's jury nullification.
Mhm.
And just recognizing we are seeing many more what I would describe as political prosecutions pop off as it relates to the resistance against certain immigration policies that are being deployed. And I want folks listening in to definitely recognize the power that you have to serve in a jury box. And I want you to imagine, right? There was a judge in Milwaukee who was arrested. I'm from Milwaukee. There's a judge in Milwaukee who was arrested for being accused of helping somebody evade immigrant detention officers, ICE detention officers. And if you're in that jurisdiction, and if you believe that that arrest was in fact not legitimate, you can serve on a jury and you can vote not guilty, right? We have to start thinking about jury nullification in this moment as an act of political resistance, as an act of resistance to a government that is abusing its power. And that's kind of part of the origin story of jury nullification in our country. And I wonder if you could you've talked about it a lot, and you do such a great job. I just wonder if you could just share us a little bit more, or again, about how jury nullification can in fact be an act of resistance.
Absolutely. I know for those of you that are out there watching that the noise of racism, of classism, of sexism, is loud right now, right? The noise of injustice and indignities being visited on our community members is so loud right now that it can be difficult to really see a tangible pathway to resist. And when people are fighting, when people are protesting, it can kind of be difficult to see sort of what role we can play in all of this, but we want to do something. And serving on a jury and then nullifying is a tangible way to exercise your power. For those of you who don't know what jury nullification is, it is literally voting your conscience, right? So if you see something that is messed up happening to a community member, right, then you can get on a jury, right, and you can say what happened to that person is not right, and I don't think that they should be punished, and you can send that message with an acquittal, right? So even if the prosecutor meets their burden, they prove every element of the crime. If you don't believe that this individual should have been arrested, you don't believe that this individual should have been prosecuted, then you have the power to get on a jury and vote not guilty. But you can only exercise that power if, when you receive that summons, you do go to the courthouse or you do call, right, to see if you're needed. It's like the bat signal, right? You get that bat signal and you show up and you are ready to dispense justice. That's what serving on a jury is about. That is the meaning of these, Jury Duty Unmasked lives. And that's the importance of educating you about your power. Not just your power to change change someone's life, but the power to nullify.
Absolutely. Thanks for that reminder. There have been calls for Governor Newsom's arrest, right? And the demonstrations that are happening, the peaceful demonstrations that I've seen pictures of from my colleagues and friends in Los Angeles. And it can be scary times, but we want to remind you all, first, the work of the Juror Project is about increasing the diversity of our jury panels, improving people's perspective of jury duty, and of course, reminding folks of the power that exists through that jury box. And one of those forms of power is through jury nullification, as Porsha-Shaf'on has just shared. I also want folks to understand that we have seen an uptick in the conversation of jury nullification as it relates to the case involving Luigi Mangione. We've heard conversations about jury nullification as it relates to the case involving Rodney Hinton Jr., right? And we are seeing the community really no longer approving what our criminal legal system's form has taken over these last decades, right? And it is not justice that's being carried out in the community's name. I want to leave you all with a challenge. One, first, share our work. We are trying to get people to understand in this moment the tremendous amount of power and value of your presence in the jury box and the power that we as a community have as it relates to bringing fairness to our criminal legal system. My second challenge is for you to have a definition of justice. We all need to have our own personal definition of justice so that when we are seeing things happening on TV, when we are hearing things happening in cases, and when we are just becoming more aware of what's happening to our community members, we can assess whether or not we think that is justice. I'm going to share my definition for justice for you all to think through. And I really do hope you can take a moment to think about what your definition of justice is as well. For me, justice is the currency that we spend to repair harm. I'll say that again. Justice is the currency that we spend to repair harm. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of harm that has been committed in our communities, in the hands of the government, the hands of our criminal legal system. And we, as members of the community, have to be reminded about the power that we have in that jury box so that we can help create a criminal legal system that is worthy of its name. With that, I want to pass it to Porsha-Shaf'on to close us out.
Absolutely. I believe it was Omar from The Wire who would always say, we all have to have a code, right? Every person has to have a code. And I urge those of you that are in the community to think about what your code is, right? Because Will just talked about currency. But if you don't have a code, if you continue to think that it's just those people over there, just someone's son over there, it could cost you. It could really cost you. So I really want to urge you to think about serving on a jury when you get that summons and how vital it could be, right? Your presence, the power of your presence and the value of your voice in that deliberation room, how you could really change someone's life. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Really appreciate you tuning in. Our challenge to you, 1, share our work. 2, define justice for yourself. Have a good evening.